Welcome to the final webinar for those who've been invited to submit final applications to CLIR's Digitizing Hidden Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices program this year. I'm Louisa Kwasigroch, Managing Director at CLIR. We're glad you could be with us today as we spend some time answering your questions. Quickly, we're going to start off with some introductions to this platform. Here are some notes about using Zoom during this session. A live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, click the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. You're welcome to use chat for introductions and conversation. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your Zoom screen, click on the chat feature at the bottom of the window. In order to send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from all panelists and hosts to everyone. We ask that you use Zoom's Q&A feature to ask questions. Please feel free to follow along with the questions as they come in and like them to let us know that it would be helpful to you to have them answered live. We will also do our best to answer these questions live, and we will share written responses to the questions following the webinar. This session is being recorded. The slides, questions and answers, recording, and transcript will be made available on the Apply for an Award page of our website in the next 2 weeks.
Our team would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from unceded land of many Indigenous peoples. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live, the Shawnee and Osage peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. May this acknowledgement remind us of our shared commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism.
I'm Sharon Burney, and I'm joined today by my fellow program officer, Alyson. We'll be answering all your questions over the next hour and conclude at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're supported today by our colleagues, Jane Larson, Lizzi Albert, and Louisa Kwasigroch. And before we get started, we did want to go ahead and share the survey link for today's survey. We invite you to go ahead and open that now so you remember to complete it at the end.
Hey, folks, we're going to move forward with taking questions. As soon as we have questions.
Hi, as a Canadian applicant, we wanted to inquire into the possibility of this grant not being available to us as CLIR is based out of the United States. Obviously an odd question, but with uncertain politics at present, we wanted to know if there was any chance. And we are still going to make this available to you, even though you are located in Canada. Yeah, we're not a government entity. We're a private nonprofit, so this is how this grant was written to include Canadian organizations, and that will continue.
Can you talk a little bit about best practices for reporting for this grant? We want to make sure we are planning effectively in the case that we receive the grant. Thank you. Yeah, so reporting for hidden collection grants is yearly. So if you only did a 1-year project, you would only have one final report. Any longer projects, you'll have an annual report and then a final report. The final report contains an element called the IP manifest. That's probably one of the larger elements of the project. That's where you are going to provide a bunch of direct links And that may be something that aligns with what you are provided by your vendor if you use an external digitization vendor. We have the template for the IP manifest as well as templates for the interim and final reports on the program's manage and award page. So you can go look at those ahead of time. In terms of the file manifest, if you are using a vendor, you may want to send it to your vendor now and see if you can work it into your digitization workflow to possibly have them fill it out, or to have them fill it out in a certain format that's well suited to what you will need at the end. And like our guidelines, our reporting templates are Google documents that you can download and work in collaboratively before copying and pasting into our SM Apply space, which is both our application space and our reporting space. You'll otherwise provide digitization counts, accomplishments and challenges, and a financial report every year.
And if you are awarded a grant, we will have a recipient webinar for all the applications that are funded. So we will go over this in great detail if you receive funding. Next question is, our library provides low resolution, not print quality images for public access and higher resolution copies upon request. Is this in line with the recommended public availability of materials digitized through the CLIR grant? Yeah, I mean, we see this a lot. First of all, what has to be made publicly available is the metadata. So that's what we're talking about in your file manifest that Alyson was just referring to. Secondly, we do see a lot of variations in low res that is free and higher res with a fee schedule. As long as you explain this clearly in your application so that the reviewers are able to disseminate between what's publicly available and what's not. Sometimes people add a fee schedule that's added to their applications, and that provides a lot of clarity for reviewers. So yeah, that's fine.
Can you clarify what you meant by copyright assessment or research being a disallowed cost? Does this mean we cannot dedicate staff time to this type of work, or does this disallowed cost relate to outsourcing, e.g. legal consultation? Yeah, we're more referring to the latter. Like you cannot have a copyright assessment done by outside counsel. We do see applications where, as a part of the proposal, there are staff. For instance, say you're digitizing oral histories that are on cassette tape, and the staff is reaching out to confirm permissions or the like. That is not something that is a disallowed activity. It's more an assessment that you would pay a legal professional for the whole collection.
We would like to digitize most or all of some collections, but there are copyright restrictions on some of the materials. Is it okay if we propose digitizing all materials for preservation, even if they can't all be made publicly available? Yeah, I mean, we see this, especially in hidden collections, AUV, because some of the collections cannot be made publicly available due to sometimes it's the ethical concerns attached to the collections. Sometimes it is strictly for copyright issues. As long as you clarify this in great detail in your RER statement, you add the percentage if you know how many files that will be, and the percentage is greater that will be publicly made available than the limited ones, and why the ones that are limited or have copyright restrictions are not able to be publicly made available. You say why. And, sometimes this includes a takedown policy, the reviewers want to see that most of the collection is publicly available and why. And if you don't, you have a plan in place to be able to handle those things and explain them clearly.
One of the notes from the panel from the first stage of the application was that we had not made contact with the Indigenous communities who feature in most of the work in this collection, made by the Indigenous filmmaker whose work we are hoping to digitize. This has to do with a lack of detailed information, which may not be available to us until we have actually digitized the material. I'm wondering how best to respond to this issue given that it has been raised, but that we can't know exactly what individuals or communities are involved until we do the digitization. Feels like a bit of a catch-22. It's hard to know the nuance of exactly where you are with analyzing your collection. I would say that generally, particularly in Amplifying Unheard Voices as a program, we're very intentional about being ethical with the materials and communities that we're working with. And the panel is going to want to see if you haven't begun this work, what steps you are taking to get to a place where you can begin this work. So if it's work that could not at all occur until digitization has taken place, I think it would be really imperative for you to explain why that's the case. If there's just no understanding of who these materials are in relation to, and if that's not the case and there is some understanding, I think the panel is probably looking for the beginning of the groundwork to build those relationships.
In a recent grant planning session with our community partner, the conversation around identifying and making public metadata records of people, locations, and civil rights and social justice movements might endanger the people in the videos, considering the current political climate in the U.S. Is there any insight that CLIR can provide on this issue, and how can we take this into consideration in our proposal? This is just expanding on what I said earlier when somebody was talking about the rights, ethics, and reuse. You know, we're navigating in very unprecedented times, and I think the review panel, especially when the subject matters are people that are most at risk, I think explaining that clearly in your rights, ethics, and reuse statements, allowing the reviewers to take into context why you may not be able to make some of these publicly available. You could do a tiered access, or if you explain that the access is only for scholars and only for this and, you know, only for certain communities, I think that that is a way to go about that. Having a takedown system in place and how that would look like if you make it freely available, and here's our takedown policy on that. But explaining things clearly. What is the percentage? I don't know, you know, exactly the particulars of the materials you're nominating, but can you add things that don't identify them by name that you may be able to take out, so that the percentage that's freely available is higher than a percentage that is not. That answers your question.
And in terms of metadata, I would just add that we don't really stipulate what your metadata schema is or what your ontology includes. So if you're dealing with a lot of PII, you can keep that in the files, but not put it in the metadata record.
Exactly.
For representative samples upload, how do you see that for oral histories on cassette? Is this simple translation what this is looking for? Same for digitization of UMatic videos. How would representative samples look? So ideally, like representative samples in an ideal universe is like some great photo you have from your collection that we can then if you're funded, use for a press announcement or the like. But we understand that like not everyone's materials lend themselves to this form of optics. And certainly for folks that have AV materials, like sometimes you can get a still, but sometimes you are just going to take a picture of your material, like the actual materials in a box or like in their file boxes in the archive, so you can give a sense of what kind of environment you're working with or whatever, because you're not dealing with a particular format that is photogenic for this particular prompt. And I would just say that I don't think I would say that the representative samples are mostly a piece that the team needs and a piece that gives the panel
Right.
maybe like some emotional resonance, but isn't really something that's like gonna bring home your super competitive, bring down your really competitive proposal if you just have a picture of a box with a cassette in it. Like that's not something that you'll get dinged for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and sometimes that is the emotional piece. If we see the box and the box is showing the rapid decaying of your reel-to-reels or whatever your tapes and those type of things. So it doesn't have to always be that. If you notice in the slideshows, if you've been to our webinars, some of the pictures are the representative images that they send us. And sometimes they are just a reel-to-reel or a set of cassette tapes.
Yeah, there's so many format options in this program that we understand that not everybody's gonna have a perfect storytelling picture to include.
And
Do you guys have any more questions? I know we've webinared you quite a bit. Is it okay to reuse letters of support if we have applied in the past? It's not prohibited. If it's the same proposal and it applies in the same way, I don't think there's an issue with doing that, but we do keep the application so they will be able to see it from the previous year. Sharon, do you have an issue with people doing that?
I do not.
Yeah, okay.
Is it okay if the planned work for a 2-year grant term happens in 1 year? Yes. This happens frequently. If you get funded and you finish your work early, you would send us an email to let us know that you've completed early and you'd like to be moved to the final reporting stage. We can do that, and you can finish early.
Just to confirm, we can only request to digitize analog materials, so we cannot digitize CDs, DVDs, etc. So there's a prohibition in the guidelines against digital reformatting. We have funded proposals in the past with very small proportions of the collection on those mediums, but it's typically a really small proportion of what's being proposed.
We are working with local communities to provide guidance on whether ethnographic materials should be made public. Is it okay to have the majority of the collection accessible be requested? Is that the question? Until their needs are articulated.
Is it okay to have them
All
I think it's probably by request, accessible by request.
by request.
Typo.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you just have to explain that. The metadata has to be public. You have to, once again, explain your rights, ethics, and reuse statement. Of course, we want to have broad representation and community-centered access is one of the core values of the program. So you have to show how that's going to be represented in other ways. If you can't have public access to the collection, are you doing outreach? Are you having symposiums? How are you working with community organizations to highlight this? You want your collections to have a broad global appeal. So for scholars and the public, you have to explain that effectively. It is a very competitive grant. So
We know that rental space is considered overhead costs and disallowed. What about costs related to storage to house materials, shelving, archival materials, crates, and storage containers? You can purchase rehousing and storage supplies. Those are allowable under the equipment, supplies, and materials line. You can't, um, buy like furniture. General purpose items that may be reasonably be expected to have a useful life after the project, such as office furniture, shelving, or archival cabinets. So supplies, yes, furniture, no. I also wanted to briefly touch on rental space because of a question that we had come into our inbox that was related, and indirect costs prohibit rental space, as in you cannot rent an office for the project. But if you're having some kind of like advisory meeting in a hotel or something, that's not the same as as rental space, and that's not a prohibition.
Or for like, say you're having a symposium for outreach,
Or
that's
like an event. Yeah, if you're using an event space, we're not calling that, that's not the same as
and
indirect
I
cost.
would include it in the budget as like symposium outreach.
Yeah,
Uh, chart, which
just
would
want to
be for
make
that
that,
other, I think that'd be on the other. And then you break down catering, event space, honorariums, et cetera, in your budget narrative. Great questions. Any more questions? Difficulty to state definitively in the grant application that certain activities will happen without knowing that the grant will be rewarded and items can be digitized. For instance, we are proposing that we can reach out to various partners that would be interested in the content, but it's too early to actually contact them now as we don't know if we will have files to share. Also, a symposium is proposed, but it could not happen if the grant is not awarded. Is it okay to simply state that we are proposing the following activities? Yes, it is. Yeah, we're planning a symposium, and you put it in the grant line.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
we're not going to come find you guys if you don't do these digitization projects, if you're not funded. That's the business.
Yeah, these are estimates, and the only time that you need an actual quote is if you have a vendor or a consultant that's being paid $5,000 or more. That's it.
Yeah, everything else is theoretical
Yes,
based on award.
yes. Kind of quiet. Any more questions for us?
I'm gonna put up my screen share and see if as soon as that happens, we get another question. We'll see.
Okay. Another question. Okay. Do the line items under 5,000 need to be described with line items? Example, 200 for food, 500 for venue, or can we just put 700 for an event? In the budget narrative, I would just put estimates that total, say you want to use $4,500 for a symposium. I would put estimates of food around this amount, rental space around this amount, and then as long as it's under that one line, it doesn't change once you get awarded. And we'll do a final, if you get funded, we do a final. Well, we do 2 tech reviews. We'll do a tech review like we did before, and if we see any discrepancies or things that you need to tighten up, we'll send you that aren't allowed in the budget. We will send it back to you and ask you to fix it. And then if you get awarded, we'll do a final tech review where we'll give you suggestions on that too. So, but they all have to, your budget narrative, the project ask, and your budget detail, all those numbers should be the same.
I'm gonna skip one and let Sharon take the fun one. I'll take this not so fun one. I hate to ask because I really appreciate the help you provide, but is there any way to get the recording sooner than in 2 weeks given the ticking clock? We've set this timeline for all of our webinars. We've managed to turn them all around faster than that, but I will note that, so as many of you probably realize, we have 2 programs. Our other program, Recordings at Risk, is in a call for proposals right now, and that closes next Monday. So we will do our best to have these materials up as soon as possible, and most likely we will be able to have them up within less than 2 weeks. But why we gave ourselves that runway is because we have to close another program next week.
Do you have fun reading and adjudicating the applications? It seems like a pretty interesting job. We love our job. We have an independent outside review panel, but we also get to read the applications as we're doing our tech reviews to make sure that everything makes sense and that you've submitted the best application that you can possibly submit. We get to go out on the road and then we get to meet you guys in person, sometimes at conferences, and learn more. And we're trying to, it's a really small but very dynamic grants team. As you can tell, there's not many of us. So we do the best we can to give you as much personalized attention as we can to assist you from application to funding and beyond. We have a great time when we get to do site visits and we see the extended outreach and breadth of the collections that you are able to digitize. And we are very committed to what we call the GLAMS professionals, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, and its significant importance. I always say, you know, if we lose the collections, then we lose the history. If we lose the history, then we lose the culture. If we lose the culture, we lose the people. And we don't want that to happen. So that's why we love what we do.
And this kind of piggybacks, are your comments included in the reviewers' comments? So most typically our comments are not included in the reviewers' comments. If you got comments, you would know from a staff, sometimes we put a note at the bottom of your comments directly from staff. And that's typically related to a technical item, like if you had an issue with your budget detail or whatnot. Some of the stuff that we were discussing about the technical mistakes rather than a comment about the material. So I would say the most frustrating thing is that we do use an independent review panel. So we do read all these as a team and get familiar with them, but we don't make decisions about them. So sometimes that's kind of the challenge, is like, we're not here to pick who gets funded. We're just here to like facilitate that happening. So sometimes you get favorites and you can't really, it doesn't matter. It's not up to you, but we do get to read them all and it is pretty great.
And I always say it's a very competitive application. We wish we could fund everyone. We just don't have the money to fund everyone. And even though you may not get selected, it doesn't mean it was not a great project.
There are good ones. I have favorites every year that don't go, and that's really the hard part, that we just
But you
can't
can
get.
reapply.
This may be covered in CLIR materials already. If so, apologies. Are new oral histories or new recordings from community input sessions covered materials that can be archived under this grant? So it's not really a collection or creation grant, so it's just a digitization grant. So we're not really here to fund the creation of materials. Sometimes those materials or that process is needed from a metadata creation perspective, and then that can be included. That's really the only space we have for that kind of funding, I would say, within the program.
It has to be materials that have not been previously digitized.
Yeah.
These are great questions.
If there is an unanticipated staffing change, can the timeline of the project be changed? For example, from 2 to 3 years, etc. This is another thing that would get covered in the recipient webinar if you are funded. We have a modification process, a grant modification process. The most common modifications are no-cost extensions, in which you can extend the project by up to a year. You are not provided with any additional funding, so you then have to stretch that budget. Other modifications include PI changes because staff comes or goes, change in deliverables, etc. So if you were a recipient, we cover all of that in the recipient webinar, but there is a mechanization for making modifications to the proposal.
As our organization is applying for this grant, colleagues in other organizations are very curious about applying as well. Is there information that would be good to share about future rounds of CLIR funding? Yes, if you go to our apply for an award page and our, it is a we are very proud of our apply for an award page and the amount of resources we provide on there. And we will have a new cycle of hidden collections opening in August of 2025. My recommendation would be to have them go online right now while all of the recipient webinars are up. And to view those, look at what the application guidelines look like for the initial round and then the final round, and make sure that this is something that they're ready. And if they're not ready, this gives them some time to think about the collection, assess their collections, and see if they're ready to take on this challenge of a large digitization project.
We also have a grants and programs newsletter. I'll see if I can find the link and drop it in the chat, but it's definitely linked on our program page. And if you sign up for our grants and programs newsletter, you get an email anytime we have a new call for proposals.
On the list of collections template, the last column asks, will any reusage restrictions apply? If we have reusage restrictions on a small percent of our collections because of copyright, will it look bad if we answer yes for most or all of the collections? If a small percentage says yes, you just say yes and you tell them why. If it's a smaller percentage, I don't think your rationale is clearly explained in the rights, ethics, and reuse section and on your collections list, it's not frowned upon.
Yeah, I just would like to say that the panel would prefer to see reusage restrictions applied when necessary than to see you not have reusage restrictions when you should have them.
And as a reminder, every application has 3 reviewers and an IP reviewer that looks at your rights, ethics, and reuse very carefully. They are all in your field, so they understand all of this.
I remember you said we would have some or all of the same reviewers for the round 2 application. Is that still the case? That is most likely still the case. We are looking at some possible adjustments for this upcoming meeting just to adapt to our meeting structure. But even if we do switch a reviewer for your panel for an application, the application's typically discussed by the panel as a whole. But additionally, they're also provided with the initial application that you put in and any related materials. So the same goes if you ever resubmit. We provide all the applications that have ever come in and all the comments that go with them.
From the chat, I'm hearing when in doubt, explain, explain, explain. Does that sound accurate? When in doubt, explain clearly and justify what you said articulately. Yes, correct. But you have word limits, so make sure it's succinct.
Please define reusage as discussed above. So, that's rights, ethics, and reuse. We were kind of using that casually to apply to that whole kind of quadrant around the access that you would allow for these materials. So we were talking about like, are they publicly accessible? Is there limited public accessibility where they have to be requested? Are they under a CC license and they can be copied and reused? Does permission to reuse them have to be requested? Is there a fee structure? So that would be kind of all of that would fall under reuse.
How many reviewers are assigned for each application? Can you tell us how they are selected and assigned without giving away any private information? Yes, there are 3 reviewers, 1 reader who will only read and will not participate in the review panel. That's an initial round. And then 3 reviewers and 1 IP reviewer for each application. So 4 people lay eyes on your application. Can you tell us how they are selected and assigned? Reviewer, go ahead. Go ahead.
Do you want me to say that, Sharon, since I usually do that part?
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, we have reviewers that are more technical reviewers. We have reviewers that are more subject reviewers, and we have reviewers that kind of hurdle both spaces. So we make sure that every of the 3 assigned to every application, you have 1 person who's a technical reviewer and 1 person who's a subject specialist, and the 3rd reviewer can kind of float between those 2 expertise levels, and then we have everyone's sort of subject expertise for all of our subject experts and our mixed subject and technical experts. So like if we have a application that's about a project from 3 collaborating Indigenous tribes, like we'll use our Indigenous experts, subject experts for that application, LGBTQ plus, same relationship there. So we look for subject matches, and then we have a tech and a subject person on every single app, an extra reviewer and an IP reviewer.
And our organization owns the physical items in the grant, and we are working with the rights holder to allow us to provide public streaming access. But we would not be able to provide actual reuse, as he would retain those rights. We would not be involved in any negotiations regarding reuse. Is explaining that sufficient? Yeah, maybe a gift of deed and explaining that. And then it becomes subjective according to the reviewers.
Yeah, that's really that the IP reviewer will be the final call on that.
Yeah.
Neither Sharon nor I are IP reviewers for a reason, I would say.
And our IP reviewers are intellectual property experts, so.
And we have 1 from the United States and 1 from Canada,
Yeah.
Canadians, so you know.
And then, I don't know if you were in the rights, ethics, and reuse webinar that we did, but if not, I would review that and see if any of that applies. Review the transcript and the video and the question and answer document. There may be an answer on there for you.
Okay, I'm gonna put my slide up again. We'll see what happens. Looks like that may be all of our questions. A brief reminder of the remaining program timeline before we end. The final application stage will close on May 5th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Award notifications will go out to applicants in mid-August. And we anticipate the public announcement of funded projects will take place in November 2025, after which awardees may make their own public announcements and post any related job openings.
We're launching a final poll right now. If you can take a moment to complete it. Thank you. Also, before you go, please be sure to fill out our session survey. Your feedback has been really useful to us as we've developed this series, and this is one last chance for you to reflect on the series as a whole and consider how we might improve if we do this again. Thank you so much for joining us. Please don't hesitate to send your questions to the hidden collections at CLIR.org inbox, and as they come up between now and the final application deadline. Hope you have a great rest of your day and happy grant writing.